Most Americans think silver is a niche investment, something you hear about when markets get weird or when a YouTuber wants to talk about the next big breakout. But if you want to understand what's actually happening right now, forget the internet noise and watch the behavior of the institutions that never talk unless they have to. Because behind the scenes, big banks are not treating silver like a hobby metal. They're treating it like a strategic asset. And when banks start hoarding something quietly, it usually means one thing. They believe the world is entering a period where that asset becomes harder to get, more valuable to hold, and more dangerous to be short. Here's the warning most Americans are ignoring. Silver is not just a precious metal, it's an industrial lifeline. It's used in solar panels, electric vehicles, data centers, advanced electronics, medical equipment, and critical infrastructure. It's consumed, not just stored. And the global system that supplies silver to the real economy is tighter than people realize. The reason banks hoard silver is not because they love shiny bars. It's because silver sits at the intersection of the two things that shake markets the hardest: confidence in money and constraint in supply. If you stay with me until the end, you're going to see the full chain: how silver hoarding connects to inflation risk, debt pressure, and supply chain fragility, and why the next time markets wobble, silver may move in a way that surprises almost everyone watching from the outside. Let's start by getting one thing straight. Banks do not behave like retail investors. They don't buy because something is trending. They don't hoard because they feel bullish. They hoard because the cost of not having something in a stressed environment is higher than the cost of holding it now. Banks think in scenarios, in downside protection, in liquidity risk, in what happens when the world becomes less predictable. And when you see big banks quietly increasing exposure to physical silver, directly or indirectly, you're looking at a hedge against a future where silver's role becomes more critical and the supply chain becomes less forgiving. So what changed? Why silver now? The first reason is simple and structural. The world is using more silver than it can easily replace. Silver demand has been rising for years, but the composition of demand is what matters. Historically, silver demand was a mix of jewelry, small investment interest, and industrial use. Today, industrial demand is the heavyweight. The global shift toward electrification and renewable energy is silver-intensive. Solar panels require silver for their conductive paste and efficiency. Electric vehicles use more silver than traditional vehicles because of electronics, sensors, power management systems, and connectivity. Data centers and AI infrastructure rely on high-performance electronics that use silver. Medical devices use silver's antimicrobial properties. And much of this silver is not recycled efficiently. It's dispersed across millions of products in small amounts, making recovery expensive and impractical. That means this is not like oil, where supply responds quickly when prices rise. Silver supply is slower, constrained by geology and by mining economics. Many silver mines are not purely silver mines. Silver is often produced as a byproduct of mining other metals. That makes supply less responsive to silver prices alone. Even if silver spikes, production does not instantly surge. New mines take years, sometimes decades, to come online. Ore grades decline. Costs rise. Regulations tighten. Energy prices influence mining costs. Supply is sticky. Banks see this and understand that a market with sticky supply and rising structural demand becomes prone to shocks. Not just price shocks, but availability shocks. And availability shocks are the kind that change behavior. The second reason banks hoard silver is monetary. The world is still living with the consequences of the inflation era and the debt era colliding. Even if inflation cools at times, the long-term risk environment has shifted. Governments carry more debt. Households carry more debt. Companies carry more debt. The system is more sensitive to interest rates and to confidence. When markets feel stable, people tolerate paper promises. When markets feel unstable, people demand tangible assets. Gold is the classic safe haven, but silver often becomes the higher volatility companion trade. More sensitive, more explosive, more chaotic. Banks don't need silver to be a currency. They need silver to be an insurance asset, something that tends to gain attention when the market's belief in stability weakens. Silver is cheap relative to gold. It's more volatile, and it can move faster when fear or uncertainty rises. That's attractive in scenario planning. If the world faces another inflation pulse, a policy mistake, a geopolitical escalation, or a financial accident, silver is the kind of asset that can reprice sharply. The third reason, and this one is rarely discussed clearly, is that silver sits inside a layered market: paper silver and physical silver. Most trading happens in paper products: futures, ETFs, contracts. This creates a perception of deep liquidity because enormous amounts can be bought and sold with a click. But physical silver is smaller, it's harder to move. It requires refining, shipping, storage, insurance, and reliable delivery. When the physical market tightens, paper prices can lag reality. Premiums rise. Delivery times extend. Large buyers make private deals rather than relying on spot markets. And suddenly, the true stress of the market shows up not in the quoted price, but in the ability to obtain metal. Banks understand this better than most people because they live inside the plumbing of markets. They know when a market is liquid and when it's fragile. They know that in a stressed environment, paper liquidity can evaporate while physical scarcity becomes visible. And that's exactly the environment where hoarding becomes rational. Not because banks want to cause a shortage, but because they don't want to be caught on the wrong side of one. Now, what is the warning Americans are ignoring? It's not buy silver or you'll regret it. That's not serious analysis. The warning is more structural. The world is becoming more constrained, more debt-heavy, and more supply chain sensitive at the same time. That combination tends to produce shocks, and silver is one of the few assets that benefits from those shocks while also being demanded by the real economy. Most Americans assume the economy is either fine or crashing. Reality is messier. The next few years are likely to be a period of uneven growth, periodic inflation pressure, and repeated stress events. Small crises, not one big end-of-world event. In that kind of environment, banks position defensively. They seek optionality. They hold assets that can protect them if markets swing violently, and silver fits that profile. Here's where the story gets even more important. If banks are hoarding silver, it can accelerate the tightness of the market. Silver is not an infinite pool. If large institutions hold more physical silver and supply growth is limited, less is available for the open market. That doesn't automatically mean prices explode tomorrow, but it does mean the market becomes more sensitive. Small increases in demand can create larger price moves. Small disruptions in supply can cause larger shortages. Volatility increases, and that volatility is what surprises people. Silver doesn't politely trend upward. It compresses, frustrates, and then moves violently. It is the kind of market that stays quiet long enough to convince people nothing is happening, then moves fast enough to punish anyone who ignored it. Banks don't like surprises. That's why they position early. Now let's connect this to the US specifically, because your audience is American and the stakes are real. America is in a strange place. The US still has the reserve currency, still has deep capital markets, still has world-leading companies, but it also has high debt, persistent budget deficits, and a consumer under pressure from the cost of living. Rates may fall and rise over time, but the system is more fragile than it used to be. The margin for policy mistakes is smaller. If a recession hits, the government will likely spend again. If inflation returns, the Fed will face hard choices. If global conflict disrupts energy or supply chains, prices can rise even if growth slows. That mix, slow growth and inflation pressure, is exactly the kind of environment that lifts metals. So when banks hoard silver, Americans should interpret it as a signal about the environment, not a signal about a single price target. Banks are not predicting one event. They are preparing for a higher volatility decade. Now here's the part to stay for because it's the sharpest warning hidden inside the story. The real risk isn't that silver becomes expensive. The real risk is that the financial system assumes availability that isn't guaranteed. If the physical market tightens enough and demand rises at the wrong time, industrial demand plus investment demand, then the market can face a moment where it becomes difficult to source physical silver quickly at any price. That's when premiums explode. That's when delivery delays matter. That's when the gap between paper claims and physical reality becomes uncomfortable. And that moment, when markets discover that paper abundance does not equal physical abundance, is the kind of moment banks prepare for years in advance. That is why they hoard. Not because they want drama, because they want control. Because in finance, control is survival. So, what should Americans do with this information? Not panic, not chase headlines, but understand the message. Big banks do not hoard assets unless they believe the risk environment is changing. Silver hoarding signals a world where physical constraints matter more, where inflation risk remains alive, where debt pressure limits policy choices, and where volatility is more likely than calm. And if you want one clean takeaway that isn't hype, it's this. When banks hoard silver, they're not telling you silver is a lottery ticket. They're telling you the world is becoming less predictable, and the assets tied to real-world necessity are becoming more valuable than the average person realizes. And the warning Americans are ignoring is not about silver itself. It's about what silver represents. A system that looks stable on the surface but is quietly tightening underneath.